So the chapter is officially here. TCB just dropped their translations for Jujutsu Kaisen 222, and I gotta be honest and say the fan base is already turned. Yesterday you were all ready to fucking mob on Gege's house, and now it's all about Yuji's fucking power-up, which by the way, I am not seeing, but we'll get into that in a second. But apparently people have figured out that Yuji's now got a curse technique. I can't quite see it that way. I like the theory, but I'm not sure how these panels quite represent that, but we'll get into that in a second. Good lord, this fan base, this community is genuinely so bloody fickle. Holy Jesus Christ. But without further ado, let's get into the chapter. Let's all break it all down. Let's have a little gander at this good stuff. Let's have a little nosy at Yuji's potential power-up. Let's have a little gander at everything that's going on here, and let's talk about what is actually happening in the chapters. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video and make sure to subscribe, because we're always here doing Jujutsu Kaisen content and other stuff, so appreciate you being here. This chapter opens up with Sukuna basically digesting the rest of the fingers. And again, like in my previous videos, I have a question where those fingers go once they digest. Do they just stay floating around in the stomach there, or do they come out the back end? You know what I'm saying? Either way, a question for another time. I'll ask Gege personally when I get on the phone to him after this chapter. Anyway, Sukuna does say that Gojo most likely has the last singular finger, which means Sukuna is now sat at 19 fingers worth of power. However, what he does say is that he is going to use the Shinbutsu mummy that is basically going to help him gain that last final finger's worth of power here. And if you don't know, I did a little quick Google, little quick Wikipedia search on here. Apparently a Shinbutsu mummy is apparently referring to a person who has been mummified while alive, and apparently was a practice for Buddhist monks to observe the point of life and death, which I find violently creepy, but that is a thing that apparently happened. And obviously Jujutsu Kaisen is very well known for taking a lot of inspiration from a lot of Buddhism, so that's kind of interesting little fact here. Turns out that Umi's wounds actually still hurt from Gojo's punch, so I'm going to assume that this whole chapter that is going on right now is literally just after the events of the previous chapter of Gojo getting unsealed, and almost no time has passed. It might even be in the same day here. Apparently Umi has had reverse curse technique healing on them, but it's still feeling the effects of that punch, which I think is quite impressive, to be honest with you, because the only other people that we've seen still suffering from wounds outside of RCT is people who've been damaged by either soul attacks or Sukuna's cleave and dismantle. So that could be maybe a little hint, which then sort of backs into the theory of Sukuna can actually attack the soul, because people who have been hurt by Sukuna haven't actually been healed. Maybe Gojo knows something about the soul, and I have speculated now for a very, very long time that Gojo can see and interact with souls. He basically does this in Shibuya when he interacts with Geto's soul when he sees Kenjaku for the first time, so I wouldn't be opposed to seeing the idea that Gojo can interact with souls. And I also did point out in that review that Gojo's punch, when he punched Umi, had some sort of weird effect coming off it. And I did speculate that it could be infused with infinity, or maybe infinity can actually touch souls and not just the actual physical body of someone, which will be interesting. But we get to switch over here over to Kenjaku, who is apparently just vibing on a bridge playing video games. He is literally plugged into a fucking lamppost, vibing, playing on the Sega fucking Mega Drive, playing fucking Sonic, getting through that green hill zone right now. But apparently he asks Kogane how many players have died as a result of their curse technique being removed, and apparently 61 players have actually died from basically just refusing to do anything in this. And Kenjaku then goes on to talk about how you only really need to take a single step basically towards progressing your own goals, and he holds nothing but contempt for those who are just simply unwilling to take that step, and then goes on to say Tengen's name in this. And obviously we know somehow in the past Kenjaku and Tengen have some sort of interaction and a past, and obviously now a future, considering Kenjaku literally is using Tengen in a Pokeball right now. But I think that's kind of interesting that we are slowly starting to get this. Again, I will say, as I've said in the previous spoilers video and in my previous defensive video of this chapter is all over the place, and I can assume that the events that we are seeing currently right now are literally directly after the events of the previous chapter of Gojo being unsealed. If at best, I would probably say it's like a day at most, because everything still seems fresh. But we then switch back to Gojo, Shoko, and Ichiji, where Gojo mentions how there is now only 3 of them left, and Shoko says, well, technically there's actually still that idiot, and I can only assume that she is referring to our favorite Stitch head, Kenjaku, who is obviously Geto's, because technically Geto is still technically alive. It's just Kenjaku inhabiting the body, so maybe that's what Shoko is referring to when she says technically there's still that idiot there. And Gojo mentions how he always thought that Nanami would actually be the type of person to survive everything. And I've got to be honest here, a lot of people I've seen kind of disappointed in Gojo's reaction to finding out that Nanami is actually dead. And honestly, I'm not 100% that shocked about it. The people that are within the Jujutsu world, kind of expect death. They kind of just assume that it is going to be a thing that happens. They just kind of assume that it comes with the perks of the job, unfortunately. We can even look at the way Nanami was and the way he viewed life. He was quite pessimistic all the time. And I mean, he was like that before he became a Jujutsu sorcerer, but it's also a case of he could also be like this because of being a Jujutsu sorcerer. And I just assume that when you get into that world, you just automatically know that at some point somewhere along the line, death is going to come for you. And we even saw that it was Gojo that said to Megami that almost all sorcerers die with regrets. So, you know, it's not the nicest of world ever. So people saying that Gojo wasn't going to be like, oh, super angry mode because his best friend Nanami was dead. I kind of saw this coming. He's always been quite emotionless, quite cold and calculating. And yeah, he does have an emotional side, but I don't think he reacts to his emotions in the same way that we were expecting him to get through it in this type of scenario. Like, you've got to remember as well, like, he's only been gone for about 2 weeks. It's been like, what, 18 days and a couple? I mean, like, he really hasn't been gone that long in terms of the Jujutsu world. For us, however, our emotional reaction as humans seeing this is obviously going to play out a little bit different to how Gojo perceives this, because obviously Gojo's only been gone for 18 days, but for us in real life, it has been like over 1,000, so it's been a long fucking time. Ichiji then apologizes to Gojo for Nanami, and Gojo basically just dismisses him and tells him that he still basically has an important role to play and he needs to make sure that he gives it his all. And this is where we find out that actually Ino is here, and he seemingly lost an eye from Toji's fucking one-handed speed bag punching attack on him, which was kind of fucking crazy, but that happened. And again, it's at this point that I can only assume that we're seeing this chapter is directly like either a day or a couple of hours after the previous one of Gojo's return, because it just seems like everyone is around Gojo right now, just sort of updating him on the events that have happened and everything that's come to pass. But again, I would like to say, as I said in the leaks video, that this chapter does feel a bit all over the place. But again, I think we should just let Gege cook. I think this is gonna, everything that we have missed or feels like we have missed here in this chapter, with it being all over the place and then the little time skip that happened, I think we're going to come back to it, and I think it's going to be wrapped up nice and neat. But we move on over to Mei Mei, who is starting a betting game with the fight for Gojo and Sukuna, which in typical Mei Mei fashion, she has saw dollar signs or yen signs and decides, I'm going to make a fucking killing. It's apparently using her crows to actually watch the fight, and is now taking tickets to sell online to people, and apparently is making a steady 5 billion, which works out, I think, like 32 million US dollars or something like that, give or take. Not sure on that one, but either way, Mei Mei is on her hoe shit as per usual, who is just selling tickets. But this is where we get into what a lot of people now are speculating as the meat and fucking potatoes. And I gotta be honest with you, there seems to be a bit of copium going on with this one. I like the theory. I want to make that very fucking clear, but I do not think that these panels accurately represent what is happening here. In the next two panels, we see Yuji and Kusakabe basically having a bit of a scrap here. They're having a little bit of a warm-up, and we see Yuji seemingly throw a back headbutt and then throwing Kusakabe over his shoulder before saying that should be a good enough warm-up. Wee and fucking Mei Mei are just sat here just watching this shit happen, and this is where people are very speculative on Yuji's power right now. Yuji looks at Kusakabe and says, it's about time for you to get a handle on this, itadori. Now, it looks as if Yuji is saying this, and Kusakabe replies with, yes, sir. Now, people have interpreted this as somehow Yuji has switched bodies with Kusakabe. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this panel, to me personally, is a little bit confusing. This is how people have interpreted this and how this is being said. This, for me, I don't think is conclusive enough. What I will say is I do like the theory, and I like the idea that Yuji does get this power up of the body swapping. I would say that the groundwork for it and the subliminal hints throughout the entire series have definitely been there. For one, let's look at it this way. Gojo says that Yuji will eventually inherit Sukuna's technique. Now, Sukuna has been around for a very long time. We can only assume, like Kenjaku, has been swapping bodies multiple times. The first thing that we see Sukuna do when he gets inside of Yuji's body is take over Yuji's body, and then Yuji swaps back. soul swapping, interchanging two souls out between the pair of them in that body, and Yuji is taking control. And apparently, Kenjaku once referred to Yuji as a cage to trap a soul, basically. It was the perfect vessel to contain Sukuna. He was always able to suppress Sukuna no matter fucking what. Even at 15 fingers, Sukuna could only keep a hold of Yuji's body for a certain amount of time. Now remember, Yuji is apparently going to inherit Sukuna's technique, and we watched Sukuna in chapter 212 tear off his pinky and feed it to Megami, basically putting his entire fucking soul into this one pinky and force feeding it down Megami's throat. Now by this time, Yuji has been with Sukuna for a very long time and has swapped in and out between the two quite a few occasions now, and well, has basically, as what Shoko said in the previous chapter, has basically just become a cursed object soaked in Sukuna's cursed energy right now. Whole theory of Yuji basically switching bodies in and out is, I like the idea, the groundwork is there. However, I'm not 100% convinced that these two singular panels convey that idea properly. Now, at first, when I first saw this last night off the fan translations, I was like, okay, maybe it's got to be a mistranslation. Maybe it's like something is a bit misleading here. But now reading it from TCB, it also kind of does make sense, but also it kind of doesn't. It can be interpreted as Kusakabe saying this and then saying yes sir, or just being sarcastic. I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced that this is actually Yuji taking over Kusakabe's abilities here, or his body, should I say. We'll just have to wait and see. And again, like I said in the previous chapters, and I've said all the way throughout this video, we'll just have to let Gege cook. This is where the chapter jumps around again, right over to Yuta and Inumaki here. We're walking through some weird columns here, and Inumaki is basically talking to Yuta about his arm, basically, and Yuta explains how he explained to the higher-ups that it was actually Sukuna who took his arm, should I say, and that was how he got sent on the mission to exterminate Yuji. However, he never told Yuji about this, and he also says to Inumaki that Yuji shouldn't be held responsible for what Sukuna does. Like I said in the previous spoiler video there, this is basically like the same situation as with the Judgeman. When Judgeman found Yuji guilty of mass murder in Shibuya, Higuruma basically called off the trial and was like, you basically weren't in control of your body. You shouldn't be held accountable for what someone else did while inside of your body. This isn't you, and this isn't what you would do, and I can see that. And obviously this is the same case for Yuta and Inumaki here. These two hold no ill will towards Yuji for taking Inumaki's arm and not having it healed. But again, it does go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. Inumaki's arm was cut off by Sukuna, who I theorize can attack the soul, and anyone who was damaged by Sukuna can not be healed by RCT. And I know a lot of people point to Yuji being attacked, but there are many options for me to say, oh, well, Yuji, for one, is a special outlying case. We know this. He was literally built by Kenjaku and obviously has some sort of property going on here that allows him to deal with this attack. Then there's also the fact that Sukuna's case technique output was lower, so the attacks may not have done as much damage as they did to Inumaki. So there are many ways around this here. I do feel like that is the kind of theory that I'm leaning towards here, that maybe Sukuna and Gojo have some sort of knowledge on the soul and are able to attack and at least hurt it, similar to how Mahito did it. But that's my crazy crackpot theory on these two anyway. We then switch over to December 24th, which is now D-Day, and we see Kenjaku, Urarumi, and Sukuna all just stood on top of a roof. And Kenjaku is basically just saying that if I'd have left Sukuna's side, I would have already been dead skis by Gojo right now. Even if, you know, that weren't the case, I have no intentions of leaving here right now, so you need to get rid of it. I'm staying here right now. And Urarumi is kind of just like the younger sister, just annoyed at Kenjaku. And again, I said in the previous video, but I love the interactions between Kenjaku and Urarumi, and Sukuna just walking around like the disappointed dad. Like, he genuinely doesn't give a fuck about these two. He's just like, for fuck's sake, please shut fuck up, please. But this is where we get another interesting tidbit, and I know a lot of people on my YouTube comments were basically saying how this panel basically confirmed the outcome of the fight and how Sukuna will lose. And again, as for the Yuji power-up, same for this one, I'm not entirely convinced. But this panel basically goes on to say that if Gojo loses, the others from Jujutsu High, particularly heavy hitters, led by Akatsu, and in the panel it shows Akari, Akatsu, and Maki here. This Kenjaku basically then goes on to say, like, they can't afford to leave their battlefield today, yeah? the only opening that they have to beat Sukuna is right after the fight with Gojo, which means Kenjaku is free to move. Now, a lot of people have interpreted this as Gojo is going to either die and then the others are going to come in to finish off Sukuna, but I'm also not really entirely convinced on that one either. Again, I said this before and I'll say it again and I'll scream it from the rooftops if I have to. If you think that Gojo is going to go out just like that, then I think you're tripping balls. These two are the literal pinnacle of Jujutsu Society right now. This is going to be a fucking dogfight. This, in terms of the UFC, is going to be a 5-round barn burner war right now. We then switch back to Gojo, who is now basically getting ready to walk out for this fight. He's in his ring gear, he's got his gloves on, he's strapped up, he is ready for this fight. And we see the group basically saying, what the fuck can we say to them to kind of cheer this guy on? Like, does he even need cheering on? And Maki's like, well, if he says something sarcastic, I'm gonna beat his ass before Sukuna even gets to him. But while these guys are all deliberating this, Gojo walks down and his aura is intimidating. They all look kind of stunned by this. Everyone looks kind of stunned, except for Yuji. Yuji comes in ready to pat this motherfucker on the back, like saying, your curse technique is in the way, turn this motherfucker off so I can pat you on the back. And Gojo laughs it off and is like, yeah, sure. And everyone starts patting him on the back, and Inumaki even kicks this dude in the asshole. That's what it looks like anyway. But I also do want to point out, it was quite an interesting little thing that I noticed here. Gojo's eyes look different in this panel here. They are cold and calculating. They don't have that typical glow. Now, I don't know if Gege has done this intentionally or if this is a forgotten detail. He has forgotten a few details in the previous chapters here. But Gojo's eyes look completely different here when we look at them normally. Normally, they have this sort of aura glow. These just are your basic standard eyes. And that makes me wonder if Gojo has done something different in this time skip that has happened. But I am absolutely convinced that we will find this out, and Gojo heads out to the fight, and we get to see the final chapter, the final page, should I say, of Sukuna looking absolutely fucking menacing, who is basically a full-powered Sukuna right now, 19 fingers and 1 Buddhist monk head, versus Gojo, a full power with Mei Mei spectating with crows charging people God knows how much for a ticket. But this is it. We're here. The next chapter is the fight, and it is crazy to think that we are here. This series is definitely over this year, and I think we'll probably run into about December. I feel like if we run up towards December and we end like as the year closes out, I feel like that's good. A good amount of chapters left to close out all the final fights here and let everyone have a go. But one thing I do want to point out also is that Kashima wasn't present in this chapter. Kashima was hanging around Hikari because he thought Hikari was Sukuna's senpai. So I do want to point out that Kashimo isn't actually present during this whole chapter here, so I do wonder where Kashimo has gone and what he's up to, but I guess we'll just have to fucking find out. But that is everything from me. Let me know what you thought of this chapter in the comments down below. Do you think that Yuji's technique is the body swapping technique? Are you on board with it? If so, let me know why or not. And do you think Gojo or Sukuna's gonna win? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you haven't already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Much love. Big kisses. Peace.